In this section, we're going to cover a brief history of peer support. Peer support is not a new phenomenon. It's been around in a variety of forms for hundreds of years and in many, many different areas of society. Examples include Alcoholics Anonymous, or AA, NA, mental health peer groups, Overeaters Anonymous, cancer survivor groups, grief groups, mothers and baby groups, men's groups, and it goes on and on. Some may think of it as newer because it's growing and becoming more formalized, and because paid positions are becoming more established. Let's take a look at some of the history of peer support in this particular sector. Throughout history, there have been early pioneers who first looked at peer support in relation to people with mental health and substance use issues. Alcoholics Anonymous was formed in the 1930s. In the 1960s, people began to question more and more about the type of mental health treatments that were being used, and also the lack of voice that people who were receiving those services had. In truth, the movement of engaging people in their own destiny was no different than other civil rights movements, such as the African American movement, LGBTQ movement, women, etc. In the 1980s and 90s, funding started to become available for peer groups, and the movement became more organized. From that time to present, there has been an incredible growth in the peer movement, and many alternatives have become available for people experiencing mental health or substance use issues. Throughout this evolution, there have been providers who've embraced the use of peer specialists along with those who've opposed it. By providing this history of the movement, we're encouraging people to gain a broader understanding of why it has occurred and how it can be beneficial for all involved with peer specialists. John Baptista Poussin is our first known peer specialist. He returned to the asylum as a volunteer after his own discharge. He was able to explain to the incoming superintendent, Philippe Penal, that working with people with kindness and gentleness led to more engagement than putting them in chains. And chains were definitely used in those days. Under Poussin's guidance, Penal would institute these practices and came to be known as the modern era of psychiatric treatment. He worked, his work was even memorialized in a painting of the day, which you can see here, which is called Penal's Removing the Chains at the Asylum. In 1793, Jean Baptiste Poussin wrote to Philippe Penal saying, "As much as possible, all servants are chosen from the category of mental patients. They are at any rate better suited to this demanding work because they're usually more gentle, honest, and humane." Poussin favored hiring former patients because he believed they would be kind and would avoid treating people with the cruel methods which they themselves were subjected to. Any history of the movement would be incomplete without mentioning Bill W., Dr. Bob, and Lois Wilson. Bill W. and Dr. Bob were the two men that founded Alcoholics Anonymous, and Bill's wife, Lois, would eventually found Al-Anon. The 12-step peer support programs would span worldwide and become a respected and an effective pathway to drug and alcohol recovery, as well as Al-Anon being there to support family members in recovery. Lesser known is the work of Dr. Abram Lowe, who founded Recovery International, which was a peer support recovery program similar to 12-step that formed just 2 years after AA. As stated previously, AA was one of the original peer groups that was technically formed in 1935. Another example is We're Not Alone, or WANA, which was formed in New York in 1948. And it had people who had been hospitalized supporting individuals as they moved back into the community. In the 1970s, there were groups such as the Insane Liberation Front in Portland, Mental Patient Liberation Project in New York City, Mental Patients Liberation Front in Boston, and Network Against Psychiatric Assault in San Francisco. As you can see from their names, this was a civil rights movement. People wanted to be treated with dignity and respect. These groups are the foundation for the modern peer support and recovery movement. The momentum was increasing in the 1980s, and funders started to consider peer support as a viable addition to behavioral health sector. The Community Support Program and the National Institute of Mental Health began providing funding for peer-run alternatives to traditional treatment. SAMHSA started to fund different peer programs, including the first self-help demonstration projects. The first alternatives conference was held in 1985. This was the first national conference hosted by and for people with mental health issues. And it's still going on today and continues to receive SAMHSA funding. Throughout the 1990s, the momentum increased with many groups across the country forming and SAMHSA funding several consumer-run technical assistance centers. 2000 through the present day has seen an explosion in peer-run and peer-delivered services. Peer-run is defined as those that are entirely run from management all the way down to delivery by peers. Peer-delivered services are those that may be delivered by peers within an existing mental health service. SAMHSA has continued to support the growth of peer services. Some states have provided block grant money. Medicaid has become a source of funding in many states, and counties have also funded peer services. The peer movement has become more professionalized while still trying to remain grassroots. Many states now have a formalized certification program, and most states have formalized training programs. The National Coalition of Mental Health Recovery formed to represent the voice of people with lived experience. This group, in a way, is similar to the National Provider Association, such as the National Council for Community Behavioral Health. Finally, SAMHSA funded TA centers, including Cafe Tech, who developed this particular curriculum. The consumer survivor ex-patient movement, as it's sometimes called, played a major role in changing the perception of mental health to include a vision of recovery and to value the voices of people with lived experience. As people with lived experience become peer professionals, they brought their unique recovery values to the professional mental health system. This led to what we know today as the recovery movement and a recovery-oriented system of care. With respect to general approaches to the mental health services and the introduction of peer roles to the mental health system. Although we continue to see growth in the sector, we also want to make sure that peer support stays true to its values and is not misunderstood or misused in different settings. Just as an acknowledgement, this particular slide or the source of this particular slide was the Transformation Center and Appalachian Group in Georgia. That concludes this particular section. Stay tuned and we will continue.